Hello everyone, welcome to the Departmentoloreto. My name is Max, and today I'd like to talk to you about a battle fought between the Space Marines and the Dark Eldar on the world of Naxos. Xenos raiders are an ever-present threat to worlds on the periphery of the Imperium, and none are more capable of inspiring terror than the Dark Eldar. They have more than earned this reputation, thanks to their speed, skill at arms, and unmatched sadism. The Drukhari love to toy with their foes, using their superior technology and maneuverability to force their enemies to die a death of 1,000 cuts, each more agonizing than the last. Those unlucky enough to survive the battle will soon wish that they had perished alongside their comrades, as they find themselves taken in chains to the dark city of Kamara. Trapped forever in the black heart of the webway, these unfortunate souls are subjected to unspeakable tortures. Their very lives become currency to be spent by the Drukhari, in order to stave off the influence of She Who Thirsts, the dark god Slanesh, and to fulfill their twisted desires. With their ability to strike without warning from the webway, and kidnap the populations of whole cities or even worlds in the blink of an eye, it's little wonder that the Dark Eldar are considered to be one of the Imperium's most hated foes. While the Drukhari attempt to avoid large-scale conflicts and reprisal, Imperial forces have clashed with them many times throughout the millennia. Millions, perhaps billions of planetary defense troops and guardsmen have given their lives while fighting against one of their raids, and whole chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, such as the noble Iron Snakes, have devoted themselves to the destruction of these vile xenos. Despite the constant vigilance of the Space Marines, the quick and cunning Drukhari are often able to avoid retaliation. But sometimes, thanks to xenos arrogance, the will of the Emperor, or just dumb luck, Astartes' forces are able to bring the Dark Eldar to battle in an attempt to make them pay for their pillaging. This is the tale of one such instance, known to history as the Battle of Naxos. Through it, we can not only witness a Drukhari raid firsthand, but we can also discover just how much Space Marines are willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of victory. But before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that I recently created a Patreon and also added memberships to the channel. You can get access to some cool perks like members-only polls, shoutouts and videos, thank you to Wolfrey, Grubus, and Error404 for joining, and early access to all my videos. Of course, there's no obligation to join, but if you enjoy my content, please check it out. Now, without any further ado, let's begin by taking a look at the origins of the battleground of the conflict, the planet Naxos. A barren but minerally rich world, Naxos is located in the Segmentum Obscurus, one of the outer planets orbiting the star 88 Beta Naxos within the coreward region of the area of space known as the Reef Stars. The system was first charted and recommended for exploitation in M37 by the rogue trader Beneficio Lazale. Although, in classic Imperium fashion, it took until the year 561 M38 for development to begin, under the approval of the subsector governor at Tarsal. Prospectors set up outposts on 4 worlds within the system, but it took less than a decade for the miners to single out the richest world and to focus all their efforts there, naming the planet Naxos after its star. The newly named world contained abundant deposits of rare intertransition metals, namely zignite, which can be used to create an adamantium analog known as temperine, and phlogisine, a critical component in the manufacture of plasma gun heat sinks. Thanks to these resources, the early colonial development went remarkably smoothly. By 589 M38, the Prospector outpost had been upgraded to a mining station, and in 217 M39, increasing population and productivity resulted in the station being granted an official colonial charter, and renamed to Naxos Colony 1. One of the most lucrative holdings in the subsector, the governor of Naxos twice petitioned for the issuance of a second colonial charter, in order to expand the mine workings. But both of these requests were denied, with the subsector government blaming their refusal on economic issues. By 811 M41, the colony had fallen on hard times. The past 50 years had seen Naxos supplanted by the asteroid mines of the Quartes Belt as the primary mineral provider for the region. This, combined with the zignite deposits running dry, saw the colony's population shrink to 400,000, less than a seventh of its height of 3.5 million, reached 1,500 years prior. Naxos had also suffered from 39 Dark Eldar raids in its history, losing a combined 100,000 souls to these attacks, although this was not unusual for the Reef Stars. The foul xenos, called primals or smoke riders by local inhabitants, were known to prey on isolated worlds within the region, and had wiped out whole colonies in the past. Even the presence of the Iron Snakes chapter, who stood guard over the worlds of the Reef Stars, was not enough to deter Drukhari raiders. But there was still hope for Naxos' future. 17 years prior, a career politician named Torben Clauser had been made governor, after he instituted a series of reforms aimed at increasing worker productivity and returning the colony to its previous prosperity. He truly believed that Naxos' fortunes could be reversed, and had been campaigning for an expansion of the colonial charter, based off recent surveys in the rising mountains that showed that there were still great mineral deposits on the world. All Naxos needed was time to prove that it was a viable investment, and there was no reason to believe that there would be any issue on that front. By 811 M41, there were no major internal or external threats to the colony. The population was peaceful, and it had been 30 years since the last Drukhari raid. Naxos' future must have looked bright. The 40th Drukhari raid on Naxos began at dawn, striking into the colony from the west under the cover of the rising mountains. Approximately 400 Drukhari raiders, riding their agile Venom, Raider, and Ravager skimmers, had descended on Naxos Colony 1, led by an infamous xenos pillager lord known only as Cabria. The colonial defense forces, regularly trained on how to combat such raids, and commanded by the experienced Major Georgi Fodor, responded to the threat quickly. The troopers took up positions and readied their defensive batteries, but the cunning xenos utilized the colony's ore processing trenches and transit channels to avoid the defensive fire. Before the CDF knew it, the Dark Eldar were upon them. Mass residential habs 12 and 13 saw heavy fighting, resulting in the injury or death of 89 CDF troopers and over 100 civilians. Fires also broke out in mass residential hab 13 that claimed the lives of 273 souls. Initially blamed on inadequate evacuation procedures, it was later found that the raiders had been the cause of the blaze, utilizing incendiary weaponry and purposely disabling fire extinguisher systems, trying to burn the colonists for their sick pleasure. Only the bravery of the falling Firewatch divisions kept the fire from spreading, and they were later commended for their service. The raid ended after 5 hours, the Dark Eldar melting away as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind only cruel laughter and the groans of the wounded. While the CDF had fought valiantly, Major Fodor knew that they had not defeated the Xenos. The Dark Eldar had left of their own accord, operating on some secret plan and leaving the survivors to stew in their own fear. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that they would soon return. Governor Clauser immediately called for a state of emergency and instituted martial law. Reserves were called up, and all mining operations, save those in the South Primary Facility, were suspended. He also ordered for an astropathic message to be sent to the subsector government on Tarsal, requesting immediate aid from local Imperial Guard regiments. 2 days later, a message from the governor's subsector arrived at Naxos. The request had been denied. It was simply a matter of logistics, the message explained. Imperial forces were already stretched to the limit, dealing with dynastic wars in the Carolon group and putting down separatists on Brachia, and no regiments could be spared for at least 10 months. However, there may have been other reasons for this refusal. The influential Lord Militant Bauer was at the same time petitioning for a crusade to be launched against the local orcs, a plan that was only halted due to his untimely death. The governor's subsector did say that he was examining other options, but to Clauser it looked like this was just an empty promise. As we will see, there may have been more substance to this platitude than it first appeared, but for now it looked like Naxos was on its own. For 2 weeks after the initial attack, the colony remained untouched. The Dark Eldar, always looking for new ways to torture their victims, often leave large gaps in between their attacks. This generates intense apprehension and paranoia, and Naxos was no exception. 1,000 stories were told of specters hiding in the hills and stalking the streets. Riots broke out, and many troopers deserted their posts, preferring disgrace and execution to constant dread. The sudden arrival of a starship in orbit around the planet did little to diffuse the tension. Rumors quickly spread, saying that it was bringing primal reinforcements to finish the colony off for good. Civil unrest broke out, worse than any seen before in Naxos' history, and the CDF were stretched to their limits trying to contain it. However, when 2 landers set down to the north of the colony, it became clear that the new arrivals were not more plundering xenos. These vessels were Adeptus Astartes Thunderhawks, each bearing the heraldry of the Iron Snakes chapter. A descendant of the Ultramarines created in the Second Founding, the Iron Snakes are a noble chapter, with a long history and a reputation for unorthodox and cunning tactics. Based on the moon Charybdis orbiting the ocean world of Ithaca and the Reef Stars, the chapter draw their recruits from the inhabitants of the islands that dot the planet. Ithaca is also home to massive sea monsters, known as waterworms, that each neophyte must hunt in order to be accepted into the chapter. These beasts also provide the name and heraldry for the Iron Snakes. Self-appointed protectors of the Reef Stars, the chapter has defended the worlds of the region from the forces of Chaos, the Greenskins, and the ever-present threat of Dark Eldar raiders, whom the Iron Snakes consider to be their sworn foe. And now, 40 Space Marines of the chapter, resplendent in their gunmetal armor and white pauldrons, found themselves marching through the streets of Naxos Colony 1, led by an officer known as Brother Captain Trokus. This may seem to be an unusual deployment, as it does not match any of the unit organizations set down in the Codex Astartes, but the Iron Snakes, despite being Ultramarine successors, are a non-Codex compliant chapter. Each squad, also known as a Fratry Squad, is an independent unit, self-sufficient and capable of choosing their own missions. The chapter master and his senior officers will make these operations available, and if the deployment of more than one squad is believed to be necessary, then a captain or other senior officer is chosen to lead the deployment, commanding for the duration of the mission rather than leading a permanent company. Captain Trokus was one such officer, and upon arriving on Naxos, he immediately met with Governor Clauser, Major Fodor, and other senior colonial officials. He claimed that the chapter had been monitoring the region, and had decided to aid the colony once it became apparent that no other forces were available. He refused to say if the subsector government had contacted the Iron Snakes. Major Fodor privately believed that he had not, and that the chapter had instead intercepted the governor's encrypted messages. This may have been the case, although there is another, more sinister possibility, which will become apparent over the course of this tale. While Governor Clauser was grateful for the Iron Snake's assistance, he was also worried. The Adeptus Astartes are known for their independence, and would certainly follow their own battle plan, expecting the governor and CDF to comply with their orders without question. But more than the loss of authority, Clauser feared for the future. Drukhari raids can go on for months, and Space Marines are not known for performing garrison duties. Any conventional campaign against the Primals would require time and patience, and it was unlikely that the Iron Snakes would stay on Naxos beyond the immediate flashpoint. Wisely keeping these misgivings to himself, Clauser ordered for a formal banquet to be held in honor of the new arrivals. Trokus and his squad commanders attended, but reportedly ate little and drank nothing except water. None of the colonists had ever seen a Space Marine before, and their presence filled the humans with awe. The heroes of legend were now among them, clad in gleaming armor, carrying massive weapons, and smelling of sacred oils and incense. Many of the colonists brought gifts and garlands for their saviors, and young boys painted the chapter heraldry on their faces. But there was still a strong undercurrent of fear. There were only 40 of the giants present, to face off against over 400 xenos raiders and their war machines. Would they be enough? And how terrible must the threat posed to Naxos be, if such titans were needed to quash it? Anticipating this, Captain Trokus had brought a written assurance that the Astartes would champion and defend the interests of the colony, asking that they be granted full trust and cooperation. The document was signed by Ithaca, most likely the Iron Snake's chapter master Sadon. Despite this, Clauser remained concerned. He spoke with Trokus, voicing some of his fears of extended raids and the need for future protection. These worries were dismissed by the captain, who said that he did not believe that the war on Naxos would be at all drawn out. Unconvinced, Clauser sent another message to Tarsal, pleading for the governor subsector to reconsider and send Imperial Guard reinforcements. He received no reply. Over the next week, Trokus planned the defense of the colony. From his base of operations in the basement of the central refinery, the captain, along with his squad leaders and attached librarian, debated their tactics. Major Fodor and his staff were also present, but aside from providing information on the local geography, any of their suggestions were ignored. The captain stated that he believed the next attack would once again come from the west. With that in mind, he ordered for secondary defensive lines to be constructed around the rising wall of the colony, and for defensive batteries to be moved to the hinterlands around Rising 2 mine. The CDF were to man the new defensive lines, with reserve levies posted around the falling store domes and south secondary mines on the eastern edge of the colony. As for the Iron Snakes, 2 squads would be positioned in the lower accessways of Hab 10, one in the Rising 3 mine, and one around the water cooling stations in the main generator facility. To Fodor, this seemed like madness. The eastern side of the colony was almost completely undefended, as was the refinery interchange in the center of the rising side wall. He demanded to know what caused Trokus to believe that the Dark Eldar would once again attack from the west. The captain was polite, but firm in his response. He simply told the major that this was the best way to protect Naxos' interest. With no other options, Fodor acquiesced. The captain's plans were put into place, and 2 days later, they were put to the test. Exactly 23 days after their initial raid, the Dark Eldar struck once again. They had hidden their forces, now numbering over 600, in the deep canyons on the eastern, or falling side of the colony. Protected from Imperial Auspex scans, the Xenos attacked at dawn, racing in from the east just as the Major had predicted. The unprepared levies, made up of conscripted miners and workers, bore the brunt of the assault. While many fought bravely to defend their homes, they were no match for the experienced Eldar raiders. Hundreds of militia and civilians died, and the South Secondary mine was destroyed in the fighting, the massive explosion alone killing or crippling over 900 colonists. Major Fodor immediately pulled his forces back, desperately trying to save the colony, and calling on Trokus for aid. 5 hours later, the Dark Eldar withdrew once more, leaving behind 3,000 dead soldiers and colonists, as well as the burning remains of the South Secondary mine. In those 5 hours, the Iron Snakes had not once moved from their positions. The colony was in disbelief. Thousands dead, labor crews trying desperately to repair the damage, and their supposed saviors had just left them to the mercy of the Drukhari? Demonstrators gathered in public, with ecclesiarchal priests attempting to soothe their tempers and prevent them from taking any rash actions. Clauser was beset from all sides by angry civilians and officials, demanding to know how this could happen. But no one dared to confront the Iron Snakes themselves. Despite their perceived incompetence, they were still Space Marines. Anyone brave or stupid enough to voice their dissent could be killed in the blink of an eye. Knowing this, Governor Clauser's subsequent action seems all the more impressive. Arriving at the Iron Snake's commandeered headquarters the following day, the governor met with Captain Trokus, who now appeared far more intimidating than he had when he first arrived. Before the governor could even speak, Trokus handed him a list of troop deployments, demanding that he position the CDF in much the same way as before, with both the falling side wall and refinery interchange still left undefended. Further CDF units were to be drawn away from HAB protection duties to reinforce the battered levies, and the captain ordered for the firefighting efforts at the south secondary mine to cease. The workings were lost, and the fire would burn itself out in a few days. Besides, the Iron Snake said, a wall of smoke was a good weapon. His squads were to remain deployed in their same positions. Shocked by the Space Marine's arrogance, Clouser could not contain his rage. He shouted at the warrior, daring his wrath, and his aides were sure that Trokus would strike the governor down for his disrespect. But the captain remained unmoved, simply stating that the governor had his orders, and dismissing him from his sight. Clouser immediately called an emergency session of the colonial office, taking advice from his administrators, priests, and military officers. All held reservations about the Iron Snakes and their orders, but support for the Astartes plan came from a surprising place. Major Fodor, despite his previous disagreements with Captain Trokus, was an experienced soldier, and knew that campaign strategies can often appear incomprehensible to the men and women on the ground. He calmly stated that, despite being in the dark, they had to assume that there was a method to the Iron Snake's madness, and go along with their strategy. Clouser eventually agreed, grimly noting that their only choices were cooperating with an unknown plan, or having no plan at all. Fodor and his officers then set about implementing Trokus's orders, and not a moment too soon, for that night the Drukhari returned. Dividing into 3 prongs, the raiders once again struck the colony from the east. The first prong went for the south primary wall, damaging it in the adjacent hab blocks in 20 minutes of brutal fighting, before suddenly peeling off into the dusk. The remaining 2 prongs drove into the falling side wall north, and the area by the burning mine and storage domes, smashing into the CDF and militia units stationed there. The combat soon devolved into savage, close-quarters fighting, with the raiders eagerly trying to get to grips with the humans, and see their terror and death throes up close. Ironically, this gave the CDF troopers a fighting chance, as the technology of the Dark Eldar could easily have annihilated them at range. Individually, they were no match for the Xenos, of course, but their resistance, combined with reinforcements called in by Major Fodor, bought the colony valuable time. The fighting continued well into the night, with the Iron Snakes continuing to ignore Fodor's requests for aid. But despite this, the CDF lines were holding, and the Major was beginning to hope that the Primals would once again quit the field, as they had done in the previous raids. Then he received word from the rising side wall. More Dark Eldar, perhaps those who had withdrawn from the south primary wall a few hours prior, had encircled the colony. After a brief exchange of fire, the raiders had driven through the undefended refinery interchange, directly into the heart of the colony. Major Fodor immediately left to take personal command of the western units. 500 Drukhari ran the hinterlands by the rising 2 mines, destroying defensive batteries and assaulting what CDF units remained in the area, and more were arriving every minute. Fodor repositioned what forces he could, but within 45 minutes it became apparent that the raiders were focusing all their efforts on taking the central refinery, one of the most critical and secure facilities in the colony. If the Dark Eldar managed to capture the central refinery, it would deal a grievous blow to the people of Naxos. Intense hand-to-hand fighting erupted around the structure, and soon the battle became a hellish scene of blood and smoke, with gunfire and the sounds of cruel alien laughter filling the air. Just before the stroke of midnight, with the raiders poised to take the refinery, the Iron Snake struck. Trokus himself led the 2 squads stationed in Hab 10 onto the field, driving into the right flank of the main Xenos force. Within half an hour, over 100 of the Primals lay dead or dying, and the CDF and militia rallied behind their saviors. Almost all of the Dark Eldar's 600-strong force had been deployed to the refinery, and while they initially met the Astartes with brutal glee, that excitement quickly faded as their unit cohesion broke down in the confusion. With their initiative lost and the reserves all deployed, the Drukhari were easy prey for the Space Marines. Driving his force northeast, Trokus decapitated the raider army, destroying the main force in front of the refinery, and presumably their leader Kabira as well. The remaining Drukhari were then split in 2, with approximately 90 survivors left marooned on the refinery approach, while the bulk of the remaining Xenos retreated towards the rising 3 mine. It was then that the 3rd Iron Snake squad was deployed. Breaking out of cover from the main generation facility, they attacked the Dark Eldar survivors at the refinery. Trapped between the Space Marines and the remaining militia, the Xenos there were quickly destroyed. Trokus and his 2 squads, joined by a large section of the remaining CDF troopers, pursued the greater part of the Dark Eldar army. The raiders, who were recently so sure of their victory, were now engaged in a running battle for their lives with their former victims, but they still had some hope. If they could arrive at the mine and dig in, they could turn the tables on the Space Marines. After all, there were only 3 squads to deal with. They could easily outmaneuver and overwhelm them. Just before the Xenos made it to the cover of the mine, the 4th squad of Iron Snakes emerged from its tunnels. The remaining Drukhari, caught between the 2 Imperial forces, lost 70 or 80 raiders in an intense exchange of gunfire. The survivors then turned east, trying to escape the colony through the refinery interchange. It was then that the last stages of Trokus's master plan were revealed. He had secretly placed charges throughout the interchange complex, and as the Dark Eldar fled through it, the captain ordered them to be detonated. Hundreds of Xenos perished instantly, and the remaining 200 raiders fled in a blind panic, herded by Trokus and his forces to the south, into the rising 2 mine. With the mine free from any hidden Space Marine squad this time, the Dark Eldar once again planned to dig in, forcing the Imperials to march into the open hinterland to face them and be gunned down by their splinter rifles. But the refinery interchange wasn't the only location where Trokus had placed explosives. Once the xenos were inside, he ordered for the Rising 2 mine to be detonated. The charges placed there, combined with igniting gas deposits, completely leveled the mine, obliterating the Drukhari army. 40 Iron Snake Space Marines had completely destroyed a Dark Eldar raiding force that outnumbered them 15-1. While victory had been achieved, the damage wrought to the Naxos colony was immense. Thousands were dead, including Major Fodor, who had fallen in combat around the central refinery. And, to make matters worse, 2 of the main mining structures were gone, and one at the hands of the Iron Snakes themselves. Governor Clauser made several complaints, accusing the Space Marines of using his colony as bait, but they were all rebuffed. The governor's subsector did send financial aid 8 months after the attack, but it was a paltry amount compared to what had been lost. Naxos rapidly declined, and as of the end of the 41st millennium, the colony was teetering on the edge of unviability. Later historians have speculated on the Iron Snake's motives. Not normally a brutal chapter, it seems unlikely that they would destroy a colony on a whim. It's far more believable that, after hearing of the Dark Eldar raid through their early warning networks, the chapter themselves prevailed upon the governor's subsector to withhold military aid, leaving Naxos a tempting target for the xenos. The decision was a pragmatic one. A Drukhari force of that size could take decades to hunt down. Far better to destroy the enemy in one blow, and spare other worlds from their predations. That is why Trokus deployed his forces in the manner that he did. By presenting such a weak target, and hiding his Astartes until the last minute, he drew the entire raiding force onto the field, allowing him to utterly obliterate them in one fell swoop. It was a brilliant plan, if a cruel one. Naxos was sacrificed, but through its sacrifice, other Imperial worlds in the region were spared. A small comfort to the people of Naxos, certainly, but then, sacrifice is a fact of life in the Imperium of Man. So that's the tale of the Battle of Naxos. I really enjoyed it, the Iron Snakes are a cool chapter, and I love it when they show up. This tale comes from the Tactica Imperialis background book, written by Dan Abnett and Andy Hoare, and if you want to see more of the Iron Snakes, check out Dan Abnett's book, Brothers of the Snake. It's focused on them and goes much more in depth on the chapter culture and beliefs. I always think it's interesting to see a story where a Space Marine chapter does something morally dubious. It really helps sell how sort of black and gray morality can be in the Warhammer universe, which is just what I love about this grim, dark, gothic setting. To be honest, the Iron Snakes weren't even that bad in the grand scheme of things. At least they saved most of the colony. It could have been a lot worse. Imagine if the Flesh Terrors or Marines Malevolent had showed up instead. It's also fun seeing these smaller scale engagements. Not everything needs to be a galaxy-shaking campaign, and stuff like the Battle of Naxos that involve only a few hundred people fighting on a backwater world really help drive home the scale of the Warhammer universe. There are thousands of battles just like this taking place all over the galaxy, which you can easily represent with your armies on the tabletop. And it'd be really fun to try to play a version of the Battle of Naxos if you had a Dark Eldar or Space Marine army, especially with the new Dark Eldar battle force coming out. I hope we see some more Dark Eldar lore soon too that makes them the focus. They're great villains, and they're especially good opposite to the Space Marines and Imperial Guard. They really help sell those factions' identities. If anyone has some good Dark Eldar books they'd like to recommend, please shout them out in the comments. Let me know what other topics or events you'd like to see me cover in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please also like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and the YouTube algorithm. And if you want to support the channel more directly, consider becoming a patron or a channel member. For now, thank you and have a great day. Bye!